what's up? Matt Guff from thehouse.com, and I'm here with Brandon Pease from Framed and the House Bike Shop. How you doing?
Awesome.
Awesome.
That's a horrible high five. We got to redo that.
There you go. There's another one. So we have a lot of bike shoots coming up, and I'm a fairly novice mountain biker. So I want to come in and talk with Brandon about the things that I need to do to like set up my bike and make sure, kind of just do the checklist before we actually go ride. Tomorrow we're going to be riding Carver, which should be a blast. Carver Bike Park or Carver Lake.
Yep, Carver Lake Mountain Bike Park.
Carver Lake Mountain Bike Park, and I want to make sure that this framed bootlegger, which is a brand new bike by the way, is like all dialed and set to go. So like, can anyone do this? Is like, what do I need to check, man? Really?
Yeah. So basically, anytime you're going to go out for a ride, there's a few things you should check. We'll kind of start and run through those things. The first thing, obviously, is tire pressure. Tire pressure is going to have a real big effect on your ride.
Sure.
So depending on which type of riding you're doing, if you're on a real, smooth, harder packed trail, you can run a little bit more pressure. Typically on the mountain bike trails around here, you're going to run into some roots, rock gardens, things like that. So you want to have your tire pressure set so where this tire can actually absorb some of those things and roll through it, as opposed to the tire kind of hitting into it. So that's where tire pressure is a really, really important part of the ride. So for a guy like your size, Guff, I'd say, on a 29, this is a 29 by 2.1. So, you're around 200 pounds, we'll say.
Yeah.
So I would say tire pressure for you, I would run around 25 PSI.
25 PSI.
Yep.
Around
and
here.
Yeah, for actual mountain bike trails, again, where you're going to be riding some really rocky stuff. If you were out on more of like let's say a gravel road ride or a really hard packed, smoother trail, you can up that pressure a little bit to make it a little bit more efficient. But the principle is that having the tire pressure set right for your weight, so that as you're rolling through obstacles, it actually rolls through it instead of into it, creating back force and making your wheel leave the ground. So tire pressure, great place to start. That's one of the first things.
Right.
The other thing is,
well, like how about this? Like, do you ever run different pressure in the front or rear tire?
yes,
You do.
yep.
Okay.
Yeah, so you can run a little more. So typically, if you look at even like the World Cup or cross country guys, what they're generally running is, let's say 19 PSI on the back and 17 in the front. So they'll do 2 PSI a little bit lower in the front because most of your weight is on the rear wheel.
Sure.
So you always run, you can run a little bit less. And again, that's kind of the standard setup, but it really depends on the rider. So like, depends on your riding style, what you want to do. As you get more into riding and you kind of discover how you like to ride, and those types of things, you'll kind of start to play with that a little bit.
Yeah.
Maybe you like a little more tire pressure. I literally see guys riding where the tire looks like it's folding almost. So to me, that's not enough. I came from a BMX background, so I like a little bit more pressure.
Sure.
So that all is a little bit preference, but efficiency-wise, you definitely want to be down in that 20-something PSI range.
Got it.
They've done some studies and some videos where they figured out that basically below 20 PSI, if you're not like a super light cross-country racer guy, it's going to be a little bit less efficient. So,
so above 20.
Yep, 20 between between 20 and 30. 30 being the max for trail riding.
Yep.
But again, so you jump out and let's say you're going to do like Lutz and 99er or more of a gravel road race. That I would actually up the pressure a little bit and get closer to that 30 range, just because you don't need that tire to absorb. You're on gravel or like a flatter surface. So
cool.
So yeah, that's the first place to start. That's where I always start, setting my bike up at the trailhead. So the other thing is basically you want to kind of run through just a safety check, making sure your brakes are working, they're not dragging. Pick the wheel up, spin it, make sure you don't hear any rubbing. Same thing on the back, obviously do the same thing, make sure there's no brake rub, the wheel's moving freely. So you're not basically riding the brakes the whole time, which I mean, if you want to intensify your workout, that's a great thing to do. But
I suppose.
So just make sure that the wheels are spinning freely. Also, when you do that, give this a little shake. Just make sure there's nothing loose. The hubs aren't loose. Make sure your axles are tight as well. With these through axle bikes, it's always a good idea just to quick pop a wrench on there, make sure your axles are tightened down. Last thing you want is a wheel coming. Yes, every time.
Every time.
Because on a mountain bike too, you got to realize there's a lot of vibration happening, especially trail riding. I mean and especially on these lighter weight bikes, carbon and aluminum bikes nowadays, that vibration dissipates and spreads throughout the whole bike. So you'd be amazed, what will come loose on a bike just from an aggressive ride.
So if you're at a trailhead, you didn't do this kind of like point inspection, and you have a little bit like you're tires are a little untrue. Is there anything you can do while you're out there? Just like,
So with wheel chewing, that's a little bit tricky. I wouldn't recommend just anybody grabbing a spoke wrench and start tweaking on their wheel because it's really easy to wreck your wheel.
Sure.
So I would say that's something that you should probably have addressed by a mechanic, bring it into a shop or something. Or, you know, they do have classes you can take to learn how to kind of do minor wheel shoes and stuff like that. And that's definitely not a bad idea if you're going to be doing a lot of mountain biking, because you're certainly going to run into that time where you guys are out ripping a trail and somebody eats it and bends their wheel a little bit. If you do have the ability to kind of get that at least rideable again, you're good, you know, especially if you're 5 miles in on a trail or something. So it's definitely something, if you're going to get into riding a lot, I would recommend just at least on a basic level, familiarizing yourself with kind of how that works.
Got it. Now, most disc brakes come with like a single piston, right? Mm-hmm. Now, when should someone like kind of bump up into like a double piston?
Yeah, so a 4-piston brake is really more for enduro, downhill, free ride. So when you're riding really aggressively and you need to stop right now, make directional changes really quickly. But I mean, even the single piston brakes nowadays, with brake technology nowadays, I mean, they're
pretty good.
Yeah, it's really good. So like, again, with a 4-piston brake, you're not gonna really need that until you're at a pretty high riding level. So it's definitely not something any beginner would need.
Yeah, not me. Yeah.
So, and I mean, you'll find, I mean, even guys our size, these brakes, single piston brakes, have plenty of stopping power. So I've actually never ridden a 4-piston. Well, I shouldn't say that. I have my fat bike as a 4-piston brake, but I've always ridden 2-piston, and I've never had any issues with it. I mean,
And now with the brake levers, is there any give or play that they should have? What kind of adjustments can you make?
Yeah,
with,
so so if you go into like a higher end brake, a lot of them will have a knob right here that adjusts that reach.
Okay.
So it actually doesn't change the pad contact. So what I mean by that is if you have that much room, you can dial this lever in. So this one doesn't have the knob on it. It actually has a little screw right here.
Sure.
So you can dial that in and change where that lever starts. It'll still have the same modulation in the sense of like it's still going to travel that far.
Right.
It's just the starting point can be changed. So people with, you know, you look at your hand compared to mine, I have a little bit shorter hand.
Sure.
For me personally, I would dial this in so that when I reach out, that lever is hitting that first knuckle.
Right.
And then
right.
I like, you know, and again, that's all personal preference. Everybody likes their brake setup a little differently. Personally, I like modulation to where my brake's catching, locking like right in here, so my finger's not extended. It gives me better control. As opposed to if my finger's out here, I got 3 fingers basically. If I have this lock up where it's almost at the bar, now I've got really good control.
Right.
Yeah,
Good
so-
squeezing power too.
Exactly, yeah. And that's the other thing, that's a good thing to bring up, the squeezing power. So, especially for people if you haven't ridden bikes for a while, hydraulic brakes have massive braking power. So there is not a lot of squeeze required. It's touching it, you know, one finger is all you need. And it doesn't necessarily increase the braking power by squeezing it like most brakes do. To an extent it does, but it's not like your typical like cable brake where the cable's stretching, the housing is compressing, things like that. So it's all fluid pressure, it's hydraulic, so there's a lot of power behind these brakes. So again, if you're new to mountain biking, you want to definitely be aware of that. Don't grab that front brake too hard. You'll be eating some dirt.
Right over.
Exactly. So so
Cool. So tires, brakes, make sure they're true. Now with suspension too, like I've got full suspension front and back.
Yep.
What are kind of like some of the first things I need to do like before I get out there?
Sure. So before we touch on that real quick, just one other thing also is with just a real quick, dropping your bike a little bit like that, you're going to hear some rattles, which is a real easy way to, if you hear something rattling, you know that something needs to be tightened. And especially with full suspension, where you've got a shock back here and here, you've got all these pivots here, so you can get some looseness in these pivots, especially if you start riding more aggressively to where you're kind of sliding through corners, hitting the back brake really hard, because you got to realize that's all attached by these points. So as that's happening, it's putting a lot of lateral load on those bearings. So that's why they have the torque spec put right on the front of them, so you know. And so I would say every couple rides, that's a good thing to just hit with your torque wrench, make sure those are tight. Because the last thing you want is that to be loose. If it's loose and you ride it, it exponentially wears those parts out. So it just speeds up that wear process dramatically. So, but then as far as the suspension, The nice thing, I'm a big fan of RockShox. The nice thing with their suspension on their forks, they actually have a chart right here that is based on your weight, and it'll give you a range. So if you're, let's say, well, we can look at the chart. Let's say you are a 160 to 180 pound rider. It's going to tell you the PSI is going to be 105 to 120.
Okay.
So you want to set that pressure kind of based on your weight. And why you would want to be at the higher end of that is if you're riding a little more aggressively. So again, if you're going to hit a trail that's got some jumps and drops and things like that, you want to set your suspension up a little stiffer so that it's, when you're hitting those jumps or landings, you don't want it to just squish all the way in because it can make the bike really hard to handle. So you want that support as you're hitting a lip or a drop. And then
smooshing out.
Exactly, because what'll happen a lot of times if guys, and I know this from personal experience, like if you set your suspension up too soft and you're like pumping through rollers even and you mistime that, what'll happen is you're coming down, it compresses that suspension because it's too soft. You come off the roller and it just shoots you. So like at Welch, I actually just about smoked a tree. Well, just about smoked like 4 trees before I got myself back together. But you know, so it's pretty crucial depending on what riding you're doing. And air pressure, I would honestly check every time you ride, just because depending on the temperature outside, what kind of riding you did the last time you're on the bike, how hard you're riding, your weight, everything, you definitely can lose some air in here. It's nothing wrong with it. It's just, you know, especially if you're riding really aggressively, it'll push some air out somewhere eventually. So generally when I check mine, it's within, you know, 5 PSI usually of what I've set it at originally. So they're pretty good, but it's a really good idea just to make sure both of the pressures are set. And again, if you're gonna go ride, for example, like Carver is a more, it's a pretty smooth, flowy, hard packed trail. Not a lot of like rock sections. There's a couple, but so whenever I ride there, I generally set my suspension up a little bit stiffer than I normally would. There's another trail out in Wisconsin called Whitetail Ridge, which is a really diverse kind of technical trail. There's a lot of rooty, rocky sections, some bridges, some drops, some, you know, really variety of terrain. So there is a spot where you would definitely want to set it up a little softer than you normally would, even though you're going to be riding aggressively, just because of the terrain is so varied that you definitely want that suspension to be fully engaged. Whereas Carver is pretty mellow that way. So you know, having your suspension set up a little stiffer is just going to be more efficient. You're going to get your lap done a little faster. It's going to feel a little better. So the other thing, real quick, with suspension is rebound and compression dampening.
We were talking about this before. That blew my mind.
So that's the beauty of suspension nowadays. It's really caught up to like motocross, trophy trucks, any of that kind of stuff. So the big innovation in bike suspension, just like, you know, motocross or anything else, is rebound. So what a rebound adjustment does is it determines how fast. So when I compress my rebound is determining how fast this snaps back.
Got it. Goes back to its original position.
To its original position. So especially on a rear shock, that rebound is really, really important. I actually learned this the hard way as well. So if you have your rebound set up fast, that's going to make that shock snap back really quick. So the disadvantage to that is if I'm riding and I come off of a drop and I hit the ground hard, immediately it's pushing me back up, as opposed to that suspension slowly coming back.
Got it.
So, you know, the first time I learned of this was jumping, did a little drop and hit the ground, and that's exactly what happened. I bounced and hit a car. So realizing, you know, because you hit the ground, you bounce, your hands are on the brakes. Well, your brakes don't work in the air, obviously. So, and then you usually hit the ground with your brake on, and then it just sends you. So, and so if you watch, like we were talking about the videos, you know, if you watch, excuse me, old mountain bike videos, when guys were first starting to really just go huge on mountain bikes, you'll see they're always bouncing, and a lot of them crash. Well, they don't have any rebound. So now with rebound, if you look at modern mountain bike videos and you watch these guys hit big drops and stuff, you'll notice that when they land, there's no bounce. Like they hit and they stick. So what's happening is instead of that shock snapping back right away, it's compressing and it's slowly coming back. Like if you took a downhill bike or a big mountain bike that they're using for this stuff, and you took the suspension and slammed it down like that, that literally would come back really slow. So if you watch here, if I turn this, so if I turn this all the way slow, if you watch, that's fast actually, so it's snapping right back. This one you probably won't be able to see it as much because of it's a low travel fork. So that was actually slow, this is fast. So you'll notice this way, see how quickly it just snaps right back. So with your rebound, again, if you're just riding kind of, you know, like an average mountain bike trail, I would recommend just having it right in the middle.
Right in the middle.
Yep.
Now, with it having a fast setting and a slow setting,
Yep.
what kind of terrain would you be riding with those settings? Like, where would you want
Okay.
a fast setting?
Yeah, so where you would want that fast setting is really technical, kind of like rock garden and root sections,
Okay.
where you're not like hitting necessarily any big drops or jumps, but where that fast rebound comes into place, and that's why on the front fork too, which we'll touch on that a little bit more here in a second, but with the fast, it's basically what it's going to do. It's going to push the wheel right back to the ground.
So you're like getting traction.
Exactly. So especially for like climbing, if you're climbing a technical climb that's got roots and rocks, you want that set up fast so that it's not slipping. And as you know, every bump you hit, it's just forcing that wheel to stick to the ground. So with your front suspension, that's where, like for even aggressive riding, you would have your rebound a little faster on the front for like cornering and things like that. So for example, let's say you're hitting a big berm, you're going really fast through that berm. You want to keep weight on here, and then what that will do is your rebound is forcing the wheel to stay on the ground.
Got it.
So if you're coming through like a rough berm that's got some holes, some rocks in it, whatever, and it's trying to push that wheel off the berm, it's just going to force the wheel to stick to the berm. And which is also why you got to have weight on the front wheel. So again, cornering on a mountain bike, you always want to have weight over the fork. If you don't have any weight on the handlebars, you'll have no traction. Meaning if you try to slam a berm with no weight on this handlebar, your front wheel's just going to wash out.
Oh.
So, but again, that's where it's a little bit different front to back, because also, let's say I hit a drop and my rebound is set up a little bit too fast on the front, you know, that's all in my arms. I can kind of absorb that a little bit.
Yep.
Whereas, especially with your seat set like this, if I land and that's set really fast, that's just going to hit me right in the backside and over the top we go. So
Yeah.
So rebound is a crucial thing that I don't think a lot of people get enough education on.
Sure.
And it can really affect that ride quite a bit. So.
Got it. Well, how about slow rebound? Is that just for kind of like big airs and jumps?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely for more aggressive riding, and I would say drops and jumps, because you don't want that back end bouncing back up on a drop or a jump. And you want to maintain that control. So if you think about, you know, if you're even on a snowboard, when you jump and you land, you're not jumping right back up.
Right.
You're going bang. You're slowly coming back up.
Got it.
So it's kind of that same type of thing. You know, snowboarding, you can basically control your own rebound and your own compression as you're landing. So from that standpoint, that's the biggest reason why the rear end of the bike with suspension is so key. And if you watch fail videos, I mean, half of those jumps, I mean, it's almost always somebody getting the seat in their backside and getting tossed forward.
Well, let's set mine really slow for tomorrow.
Yeah.
Probably should. I don't want to end up on a fail video. Yeah. Let's see.
Yeah.
Cool. So what else? Is there anything else? We got tire pressure, brakes, the wheels.
Yeah. So the other thing I would always recommend doing is, you know, if you're at the trailhead, you want to make sure that your gears are going to work. You don't want to get out on the trail and then all of a sudden, oh, my shifting's messed up, right? So one of the really key things, and I'll turn it this way so the camera can see a little better. So what we got right here is what's called your derailleur hanger. This is your rear derailleur, which is what's actually making the shifting or it's actually making the shifts. So if you look at this little hanger right here, what that does is that is specifically designed to bend. So on a mountain bike especially, you're gonna crash. If this thing takes a hit, basically the reason that is designed to bend is so that you don't break the derailleur and you also don't break the bike. So those hangers are pretty inexpensive. They're 20 to, well, $45 depending on the bike, but that's better than replacing the derailleur or a frame. So, so you know, that's why they use those. So that's another key thing to look at before you ride. And basically this should just be perfectly vertical in line with these cogs. So you can kind of use the rear gears as like a reference. So everything should be vertically in line with these chain rings. So when you look at that, and let's say you see this is tipped in a little bit, what's going to happen is as you get to this gear, this cage, because it's tilted now, will catch the smoke and it'll actually just break the derailleur right off.
Wow.
So that's definitely a huge thing for sure. Every mountain bike ride, always look at this because that can definitely leave you stranded on the trail.
Got
So,
it. Do a little lap in the parking
yep,
lot.
so
Make sure
exactly, check that, and then I would, as long as that's straight, then I'd hop on the bike, run it through the parking lot, just, do a couple of slow laps, run through all the gears, make sure it's shifting, before you get out on the trail. So that way you can correct any of those things before you're out there.
Got it.
The other thing that I always check, and I'd always recommend people checking, is your headset. You can cause a lot of damage to a bike with a loose headset. So the easiest way to do that, you see a lot of people rocking their bike like this with the handlebars straight. The problem with that is that there's always a little bit of movement in probably your brake pads or the caliper itself. There's always a small amount.
Right.
So really the best way to do this is to turn it 90 degrees this way
Okay.
and hold the brake and rock it forward and back.
This way.
Yes.
Laterally.
Yep.
Yeah.
So if you go this way now with the wheel turned sideways, you know that it's not the brake or anything, it's actually the headset.
Got it.
So this one's nice and tight. And then again, the drop test is, that's a,
Nothing rattling.
yeah, exactly. So, and you'll feel it and hear it. That's one thing where these linkages, you'll notice they're loose. If you go like this right now, hear that?
Yeah.
So there's a little bit of looseness, I'm
Yeah.
guessing right there actually, or right here.
Huh.
So, you can tell that just by moving the bike slightly, especially with full suspension bikes. With all these pivots, you'll notice that something's loose. And again, that's something you want to immediately address because anything loose on a suspension system is going to wear it exponentially.
Got it. Got it. Lots of moving parts.
Yes.
Man, now is there anything that you specifically do? Do you have like a ritual thing that you're like, I always do this before I go ride? What's your thing? Get in the zone.
I just always wear gloves for one thing, so I always kind of like, right before I ride, I'm just usually kind of getting my gloves on and getting my mind in the right place. And
Yeah.
I don't know, since I was a kid, I've always been super into like cool bike gloves, so I always just make sure I have a cool pair of gloves, and
That's right.
it just makes me feel cool.
Yeah. What are your gloves you're rocking now?
I'm rocking
Fox?
the Troy Lee
Troy
designed ride wheelies gloves.
Yeah. Those are those really light ones, right?
Nope, they're
No,
the other ones. Yeah, they
Okay.
have a little tab on the tab. It says Pop Wheelies. So wheelies are one of my favorite things to do. So they sold me.
That's
right
what we're
there.
gonna do. Matt has a pretty good wheelie, I think.
Nice.
How's your wheelie?
No good.
No good? We're gonna try some wheelies tomorrow. That's what we're gonna do for sure. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you
thank
for
you.
walking us through this stuff.
You bet.
I'm really excited for tomorrow. We've had to cancel a couple of shoots because
Yeah.
of the weather. It's been super rainy. A lot of the trails have been closed, but Culver's gonna be open for tomorrow. The weather looks good.
Yeah.
My bike's gonna be set because of Brandon. And dude, couldn't do it without you.
Yes.
Thanks so much, man.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Look
thank
forward to
you
riding.
guys for watching. Leave a comment or question. Let us know what your kind of like ritual, kind of checklist things are when you go mountain biking. Remember to subscribe to the channel over there. Hit that bell for notifications every time you do get a new video up. And remember to check out some more vids there. And hopefully we'll see you guys around. Peace.